Welcome to Two-Way Tonight. Thanks for joining. It's a big day on the presidential campaign trail. Kamala Harris has now done 2 of her 3 media appearances. We're going to take a look at those, The View and Howard Stern. We're also going to look at something, to me, the most interesting thing I saw today occurred on Two-Way at the morning meeting. We're going to look at that clip from one of the clips from 2 of the Trump supporters we heard from this morning. And we're going to talk about the Bob Woodward book, which a number of news organizations got their hands on, and I got asked about a lot today. So I will address that. As always, interested in your questions and comments. We'll have some great guests joining us. We want members of the community to be part of this conversation. So if you'd like to be part of the conversation and you're here on the Two-Way platform live, please raise your electronic hand. As always, we love new people. If you haven't talked before on the platform, we got a lot of new people this morning. If you haven't talked, please raise your hand. If you have, welcome your continued participation. And if you're watching live on YouTube, welcome. You can participate in the chat. As always, this platform is about peace, love, and understanding. Another day for me hearing from people, because this morning we heard from 2 extremely compelling Trump supporters. A lot of people who support Vice President Harris said, your platform's ridiculous. It's all about Trump. And what I say is, no, we have a lot of Harris supporters. Some of them have been a little more shy lately than before, but we have a lot of Harris supporters here. That's the strength of the platform. We have people across the spectrum. Some people don't like either candidate. But what I also say is, again, it's your opportunity to learn. What a gift to have a place to go for civilized conversation if you're a Harris supporter, to understand why half the country's supporting Donald Trump. Same with you're a Trump supporter and you don't understand how anyone can support Kamala Harris. Our goal on election day and beyond, whenever there's a winner, is to have played a constructive role in Harris supporters reconciling themselves to a Trump presidency, or Trump supporters reconciling themselves to a Harris presidency. That's a lofty goal, and I'm not saying we'll do it all by ourselves. But if you come here and you're a Harris supporter and Trump supporters are talking, what a gift, what an opportunity. And for me, someone who's neutral, annoying both sides, it's a great opportunity also to learn, why are Trump supporters so passionate? Why are Harris supporters? So Donald Trump was on Truth Social today. As far as I know, he didn't do anything in public. He was supposed to be doing a town hall tonight, but that got rescheduled because of the storm. We're all waiting for the storm to hit and dealing with the implications of that for human life, and then, of course, for what happens to the race. So what a lot of Harris supporters ask all the time is, how could she not be running away with this? Donald Trump is a convicted felon. He's a liar. He's January 6th, all the things that get discussed. How could this not be a complete rout? And Trump supporters, the kind of flip of that is, why is Trump still so popular? Why is anyone still like Donald Trump? This is the existential question that Harris supporters ask themselves and ask me and ask the country all the time. One thing about the vice president, that if you've studied her career, including her time in California as a senator, as a presidential candidate in 2019, the thing that people put their finger on is her lack of decisiveness. And we're going to see that in the clips we're about to show. That, to me, is her Achilles heel. That is the thing that bedevils her, because public speaking, she's not a stupid person. Public speaking on tough questions, even if they're not asked in a tough way, involves on your feet making decisions about what to say, and you don't want to annoy anybody or anger anybody or commit a political error. And her lack of decisiveness in her thinking and in where she wants to end up, and then how she expresses it, to me, and I've said this before she was a candidate for president, when she was just quote unquote the vice president, this is her problem. And it's a problem that elected Democrats in Congress and the governors who support her fervently, they know that's her problem. They see it. They watch her speak in public, and they're gritting their teeth and holding their breath, because most of them think, well, I could answer that question better than she can. I support her. I want her to win. But it's her lack of decisiveness. And as she has struggled, because she's not ahead, she's even or behind in the battleground states. As she has struggled, their frustration has grown more vocal. And we saw over the last day, Tammy Baldwin, Senate candidate, senator in Wisconsin, her team putting out their polling data. We saw Elise Slotkin, the Senate candidate in Michigan, talking on a fundraising call about her concerns. You hear it from the camp of Governor Shapiro, you hear it from the camp of Governor Cupper, all of them expressing concern and hoping for her to do better. And today was a day when Joe Biden was going to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. He just landed in Pennsylvania a little while ago. He's out and about. Okay. He's campaigning in battleground states. there's a view of the world that says maybe he should be less visible, but he's out and about. Jill Biden announced she's out and about today. So today on The View and then on Howard Stern, it was an opportunity for the vice president, two gentle interviews with friendly interviewers, but it was an opportunity for her to be out there and prove to people that the more interviews she does, the better. She's on a run of interviews. She did the long podcast. She did 60 Minutes. And so people are like, okay, now you're warmed up. You get the hang of it. So here's what happened on The View. She was asked a relatively simple question about her differences with Joe Biden. And before I show it to you, some of you probably, I'm sure some of you already seen it, but I want you to ask yourself if you think this was the best possible answer to give under the circumstances. Play number one, please.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Well,
Okay, so to me, to my naked eye, she reacted to that obviously expected question as if she was woken up in the middle of the night and someone said, what is the air temperature on Mars? Like trying to get her bearings and figure it out. Play it again, please. Please play number one again.
if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Well,
okay, so if that's the answer you want to give, maybe a little more decisive than halting, it's all over red Twitter. And if it's not in a Trump ad by the time we meet tomorrow, I'll be really surprised, or at least a web video. But it's also the subject of many emails and texts I've gotten from Democrats today saying that if she loses, that could symbolize the whole thing. She's had to walk this tightrope between supporting the Biden-Harris administration and distancing herself. She said she's not Joe Biden, they're different people, manifestly true. But that answer makes no sense to anybody I heard from, including her supporters. We can talk about that. All right, now, that's gotten the most attention for people who are critical of the interview. And the interview was fine. It didn't make any news. And she was poised and she got along with them. And I'm sure that if you're just watching The View and you're an undecided voter, I'm sure you come away with a favorable view. I'm virtually certain. Joe Klein, my colleague at Time Magazine, who writes a great Substack now, in analyzing the 60 Minutes interview, said the thing that I should say at the beginning of the discussion of all of these Harris appearances. I don't have a friggin' idea how a casual voter who's seeing that on The View directly or seeing clips from The View is going to react, an undecided voter. I have no idea. And anyone who says they does, I think is being ridiculous. So we're talking about these things at a level of elite abstraction, which may be meaningless. But unless someone wants to fly me to Green Bay to go to diners every time Kamala Harris is on TV, I have to do the best I can. That answer I thought was horrendous, but I'm not the only one. But I want to show you another answer she gave on The View that I actually think speaks even less well of her capacity to communicate the way she needs to win this election. Play number two, please.
Go back to the 30s, a dictatorship by any other name. This is what he is planning.
Yeah.
People are saying this could be the closest election in a century.
Yeah.
I personally cannot understand why anyone would vote for him. A lot of it is, I think, he's getting bad information. People are getting bad information from other channels. But do you have an explanation for this at all?
Well, let me just add to your list. I mean,
we don't listen. It's only an hour show.
Exactly. How much time do you have?
Twice impeached.
Including, he has said he would terminate the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah.
And Joy, here's what I'd say. Look, I just recently did an event with Liz Cheney, the former Congresswoman.
I know.
Her father, the former Vice President, Dick Cheney, has supported me.
Unbelievable.
There are over 200 former members of both Bush presidencies, John McCain, Mitt Romney, who have endorsed me.
Right.
Leading thinkers in the national security space are supporting me. And
All right. She goes on to say nothing about Trump supporters. She didn't say they were deplorables, and she didn't say they clinged to their guns and religion. But when asked, why are there so many Trump supporters? Her reply is not, let me appeal to them. It's to say Liz Cheney, who, as I always say, is from the Adam Schiff wing of the Republican Party. That is not the way Bill Clinton or Barack Obama would have answered that. It may be the way Joe Biden would have answered it. But not just if she wants to be president of all the people, but if she wants to actually demonstrate that she understands why this is a close election. To me, the answer to the question she was asked is not to attack Republicans and to say how horrible Donald Trump is. It's to try to say, I get his supporters. I get what they're concerned about. I get what the appeal there is for someone offering them whatever, but here's my appeal to them. That's not what she did. So I think that answer speaks to the challenges she has. Tricia McLaughlin, who, amongst other things, worked on the presidential campaign of Vivek Ramaswamy, who toggles between Columbus and New York, two of America's finest capitals. Welcome. What do you think of my view of her answer to that question of why is the race close? The race is close because Liz Cheney supports me.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I think she missed what could have been a slam dunk there, which is speaking to the hardships that the American people are facing, especially the economy. She could really go into her economic plans and how she would lower prices. That could have been a total slam dunk. But I also think in the initial answer where she said nothing comes to mind if there was anything she would change between what her and Joe Biden did for the last 4 years, we know 60% of Americans want change, and that speaks to her slogan, a new way forward. So she's not presenting that in any way, that this would just be 4 more years of really the Biden-Harris administration, and that's not what Americans are looking for. And to your point, I know the Trump campaign already is about to get that up on air. This is a total gift to them. So I don't think that this made a lot of news. She did have a warm relationship, great rapport with the hosts, and I think, there were some moments where they're talking about the hurricane and misinformation, and I think she came off well. She came off more as a statesman, but overall, some of these interviews are just about moments, and I think this and the CBS interview is not going to serve her well.
Eleanor?
Yes.
Were you on to see those 2 sound bites?
I was, and I watched them in real time.
All right. Are we being too harsh about those answers, or
you're picky?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just, she's being careful. She doesn't really want to make news. I think she comes across as somebody who's warm and empathetic. I don't see, what do you want her to say? Yes, we should let Ukraine into NATO now. Where is she going to separate from him? She's not going to do that. This is a tenuous time with allies, and things are in the works. She can show more empathy, I think, in the Middle East. But I mean, you've got a war likely to expand there. So she's on hot coals. She's not going to get out ahead of the president, who is still in office. And on domestic policy, she advanced an issue which I'm sure you all don't care much about, but to the people who watch The View, that and the sandwich generation and all of that, that resonates. So I think she's picking her spots with these various interviews, and she feels the contrast with Trump sort of speaks for itself. She does have to keep accentuating it, and the latest polls show that she has the advantage on cares about people like me. So there's some aspects of the polling on the economy that are favorable to her, and she is now seen by a few points as the change candidate, which is flipped. So I think she doesn't want to mess that up, and I don't think she thinks that getting out there more forcefully and making news is the answer. That's what Trump wants to do. He'll say and do anything to just disrupt. He just wants to disrupt. He thinks that fires up his base, and that's all he needs. She's reaching out to different groups very, very strategically, and she's trying to win this inch by inch. And, I don't know if it's going to work, but I think that's what she's doing, and I wouldn't automatically, say that these are mistakes, that she's being too cautious. I mean, I think to myself, there should be an opportunity. I love you, Joe, but I'd like to hear something after that. But
Right.
these various interviews, I don't think were really the vehicle for that.
What confuses me is her aides always say, in blind quotes, she's loyal to the president and she doesn't want to distance herself. In the name of loyalty to the president, I mean, if it's deleterious to her chances of beating Donald Trump, shouldn't she be throwing a little bit of
Yeah,
loyalty aside
I
to
just
say,
don't know
I love
where.
Joe, I love him? Well,
Yeah.
but it's
I don't
time's
know
running
where
short.
she does that. I mean, what would you suggest? I mean,
Well, something, you know what I'd really suggest? I say this to anyone running for president, something she really believes, like something where she actually thinks the administration is off track and she can speak passionately about, hey, I'm a big supporter of our policy on X, Y, and Z, but here's the thing I think we got wrong, and I'll do it differently.
actually,
You know?
guns and abortion are things that she cares about, but and Biden was a little slow on abortion.
Yeah, well, she could say that,
You
but I
know,
mean,
but that would
in
that
the
would
rest
seem
of the
so
week,
ungrateful. I don't know,
well, it would, but again,
unnecessary. But maybe
does
that's
she want to seem, I'm sorry to interrupt, but does she want to seem ungrateful or does she want to win?
well,
Because the soundbite's going to be
yeah,
everywhere,
yeah.
courtesy of the Trump campaign
Yeah,
for the
no, I'd
next
like
couple
to
days.
find, I mean, I'd like to find the subject that where it would work, and maybe
Yeah,
they're looking for it. I don't know, but
maybe they're running out of
I
time.
agree that a little more space would help.
Yeah. All right. So she also did Howard Stern. I'll admit I'm whatever the Swiftie equivalent is of a Howard Stern fan, have been
Yeah.
for a long time. He's gone so soft on the Democrats. I couldn't believe his Hillary Clinton interview and his Joe Biden interview were like, I don't know. It was like he was like Joy Reid. He was so into them. And today was similar, but he did elicit a ton of information. And this is from the Associated Press write-up of the Howard Stern interview. I'm reading this verbatim because it's my favorite Associated Press paragraph in some time. Here's the things that he elicited. She ate a family-sized bag of Doritos after Trump beat Hillary Clinton. She works out on an elliptical every day. Her first job was cleaning test tubes at her mother's laboratory, and she got fired. Her favorite Formula One driver is Lewis Hamilton. She went to see U2 at the Sphere in Las Vegas, and she recommends going with, quote, a clear head, meaning not high on drugs because, quote, there's a lot of visual stimulation. I'd vote for that person. I didn't know she had a favorite Formula One driver. Do you guys have a favorite Formula One driver?
No, no, and
Seriously, you got
I
one?
don't think
Yeah.
she could have been prepped for that.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff.
Right.
All right, let's listen to a clip of the Vice President of the United States sitting down with the king of all media, who lives exactly halfway between me and Trisha, by the way, little known fact. Play that, Howard Stern.
I think that, Howard, people ask me, like, what do you think is going on and what is the tension here? What's at stake? And there are many things, and I can be much more articulate than what I'm going to say. But ultimately, I do believe that this is an election that is about strength versus weakness.
Yeah.
And weakness as projected by someone who puts himself in front of the American people and does not have the strength to stand in defense of their needs, their dreams, their desires, the work that must happen to make sure that we are a secure nation, that we are nurturing and protecting our alliances around the world, that we are supporting America's military, that we are fighting to bring the cost of living down for working families, that we are building businesses, building growth.
Did you?
I think.
Okay. So that's I thought I just as someone who listens to rhetoric of politicians, I didn't love when she said this wasn't herself at her most articulate, but I thought the rest of it was very relaxed. She clearly is like a little bit of a Howard head and totally comfortable with him. And I thought that was representative of the interview. The whole interview was like that. It was very relaxed, very conversational. In some ways, she seemed to me more relaxed than on The View. But again, I just don't know how Howard's audience and anyone watching the clips is going to receive it. But again, no news. So again, it's kind of 101 political communication. Like, go in with your soundbite. As Eleanor pointed out on The View, she pitched a plan, not very well defined, but a plan that she says would allow Medicare to pay for home care for seniors on Medicare. But you didn't really have a soundbite on that, and I don't think from the coverage I've seen, people aren't really seizing on that. So again, it's just the question of what are these appearances doing? She's not making news, and we have to see that, you know, we're not going to see it move the polls in some linear way, but I will be curious to see what tonight's like, because Colbert is, I've been on his show a couple of times. He's, when he wants to be a great host and not passive aggressive and hostile, he's a great host. And I suspect, maybe because she's being warmed up, that tonight will be the best of the three, and maybe make a little news. But again, it's airing late, so we'll see, and we'll talk about that on the morning meeting tomorrow. Again, we're going to go to your questions and comments in just a bit. If you'd like to get in the discussion, and we always welcome new people, and there's lots of new people on here, please raise your electronic hand, and we'll start calling you in a moment. One other piece of news I want to mention is the Bob Woodward book leaked in this news cycle. If you're a student of political journalism or a journalist, as I've been for a long time, this is a ritual. The Woodward book comes out, and everybody speed reads it and writes long stories with all the nuggets and tries to guess who the sources are. Often, if you have the least bit of understanding of journalistic convention and how Bob does this, the sources are not vague at all. I remember when I was covering the Clinton White House and a Woodward book came out, there was a scene involving Paul Begala walking into an office in the old executive office building where Alice Rivlin was eating like a tuna salad sandwich, and she had tuna salad all over her face, according to the omniscient narrator. Now, do you think that was Paul Begala providing that detail or Alice Rivlin? I went with Begala, and I believe maybe he eventually apologized for it. But there's several scenes involving Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and President Biden, and there are discussions in the Oval Office, including one scene which has got a lot of attention about the two of them discussing whether Joe Biden should drop out of the race. Again, maybe Joe Biden was the source, but probably Tony Blinken. And then there's characterizations about foreign leaders. Again, Tony Blinken in the room. My guess is he's a source of Woodward. That'd just be my guess. I've been asked all day, will this affect the election? I really don't think so. There's stuff in there about Donald Trump allegedly having lots of post-presidential conversations with Putin, and about giving Putin some COVID testing equipment. To me, voters are not going to care about this. And it's just another day to stoke Trump derangement syndrome. I'm not minimizing it if true. I always say that with books. If true, there's a headline on that. Trump secretly stayed in touch with Putin after leaving office. That's the thing that's probably gotten the most attention. If you don't like Trump's relationship with Putin, you probably don't want him staying in touch. If you think Trump might win and having a good relationship with Putin might help to end the war, you might think if they are talking, it's a good thing. The Trump campaign won't confirm that they're talking. But I'll say again, I don't think this will affect the election. If people want to ask me questions about the Woodward book, I'll do my best to answer them. But I find it a little bit difficult to see how any of this stuff is going to be anything more than fodder for another news cycle or two, and people wanting to ask questions. Trish, I'll ask you before we go to people's hands up. Where do you see the race right now? Based on everything you know, do you think it's a toss-up, or do you think one candidate would you favor them at least slightly, and why?
Top of the ticket, I would slightly favor Trump. That being said, I think that Republicans might lose the Senate. That's the direction. Just Nebraska.
Republicans might lose the Senate. You mean not take the majority?
That's my read.
Really?
Right now, I think Nebraska is going to be in play. I think Wisconsin could be a problem. I think Ohio could be a problem. We'll see about PA. Arizona, it's not looking good. So I think that's going to be tough for Republicans. I think right now, Donald. You think Montana is solid Republican, or even that's up in the air? I think Republican for Montana.
All right, so assuming they don't lose Nebraska, you only have to win one more, assuming Harris wins. So
I don't think we win Ohio or PA.
Yeah. What about Michigan? No. I used to be where you were.
Gretchen Whitmer has.
Yeah. I was very bullish on the Democrats' chances.
I think Gretchen Whitmer has.
Go ahead. No, you go.
I think Gretchen Whitmer has done a phenomenal job in Michigan as far as whipping up support. So I think but I give my money's on Donald Trump for top of the ticket, but I don't think we're going to know November 5th. There's no way. I don't think we'll know until maybe that Saturday.
All right. I respectfully disagree to say we won't know. We might. I think we might, because I think somebody might win five or six of the battlegrounds. Eleanor, what's your overall view of where the race is?
I don't know any Harris people who are confident she's going to win, but they also can't quite see her losing. And
Right.
I'm not as familiar with the Trump people, but I think there's more, sort of rah people who are pretty confident that Trump is going to pull this out. So
Right. All right. I want to show you guys one more thing, and then we're going to go to people's questions. And Bill, you'll be first in, because I forgot I wanted to show this clip. If you weren't on the morning meeting this morning, we just, as we do, we randomly took folks. I didn't know who I was calling on. We called on two women, one from Sarasota, Florida, Hispanic American, and then a Black woman from Manhattan. And they're both fervent Trump supporters. And the two of them talked for 16 minutes. And I strongly recommend it to you, particularly if you're a Harris supporter and you say, I can't understand anyone, let alone someone Hispanic or Black, voting for Donald Trump. I strongly recommend it to you. And I want to show you just a little bit of the woman, my neighbor here in New York City. I wanted to show you a little bit of her explanation about part of her explanation about why she's supporting Donald Trump.
I am voting Republican as a protest vote against the Democrats. I just don't see the Democratic Party as beneficial. To me, it's like a swap. They have become the party of war. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And this whole thing about abortion, it's the abortion, the January 6th. It's becoming tone deaf. No one is even listening to this anymore. You want us to vote about abortions and a January 6th over our wallets. It doesn't add up.
What do you like most about Vice President Harris? What do you find most appealing about her as a public official?
From nothing. I honestly think she's dangerous to Black people based on her record in California as a prosecutor. She was jailing mothers for truancy. She was locking people up and holding them in prison after their time to fight fires. And it's her whole history, especially with Black people in California, has just been whitewashed like it never happened. But it's in black and white. No, I can't consciously think to vote for her. And many Black people I know said the same thing. They would rather not vote or vote down ballot than to vote for her. They find her to be dangerous.
So again, I recommend the whole thing to you. It's on our YouTube channel. You can watch the full episode and hear from the woman from Florida who was also super compelling. And I'll say again, doesn't mean she's right. Doesn't mean I'm endorsing her point of view. But to me, she was asked, in our colloquy with her, she was asked, what about Donald Trump? I said, what about birther movement? What about knowing who David Duke was? I think I brought up one other thing. And she said, he's of my parents' generation. So's Joe Biden. And how about Joe Biden's history with racial insensitivity? She didn't say it explicitly, but I think she was referring to associations with Strom Thurmond, some of his aspects of his record in Delaware on busing, etc. So I found it incredibly informative and compelling. And again, if you're a Harris supporter, I really recommend the whole thing to you. So I'll start with Eleanor. I don't know if you saw the whole thing or what you thought of that clip, but in general, do you find Harris supporters understand the appeal Donald Trump has, or do you think it's still a mystery to most Harris supporters?
Oh, I think they understand. And anybody with any sense of history, you could go back to, Reagan and sort of racially coded policies, despite his amiable character. You can go back on the Democratic side and the trade NAFTA and how that hollowed out all the areas that Democrats needed to win. And the roots are everywhere, and both parties are to blame. And Harris is not getting the numbers with the aspects of the Democratic coalition that Barack Obama got, kind of understandably, for a lot of reasons. And so I think the woman who just spoke probably, represents that, but, she's still going to get upwards of 90% of the Black community. So, this woman is entitled to her views, but I certainly don't think that she represents a growing phenomenon that's going to affect this election.
Trish, I don't know if you saw the whole interview or the whole conversation, but what did you think of what we just showed there?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that Donald Trump is doing better than he ever has polling as far as with Black and Hispanic voters. Kamala Harris is doing better than Joe Biden was, but she still really needs to run up those numbers to be competitive. I think that the number one takeaway was that it came down to her pocketbook. That's essentially what she said. She said, Democrats want to convince us that it's about January 6th, it's about abortion, but it seemed her number one issue was the economy. So I think that it's going to resonate across the board. It doesn't matter what gender or race. That's what it's going to come down to.
She also talked at length about basically feeling offended by the Democratic Party and the policies of the Democratic Party. Again, super compelling to me, not speaking for everyone, but certainly representing a point of view. All right, Bill, welcome in. Thank you for coming. Tell folks who don't know where you are, who you're supporting, and what's on your mind.
My name is Bill Alene, and I am living in North Carolina, but full disclosure, I've been here 30 years, but I'm from Brooklyn. Once from Brooklyn, always from Brooklyn.
Bernie Sanders tells me that all the time.
I am a Harris voter, and I just have a few basic questions for Trump supporters. One, what do you find optional about peaceful transition of power? Two, the fact that a man incited a violent insurrection that killed cops at our Capitol, first time in history, never even in the Civil War, but yet people try to conflagrate minor differences about what people said or what they could with a coup attempt, and they call it a peaceful, a peaceful tourist visit. The other thing, and I say it to white and Black people, but Black people in particular, know your history. Your vote was won with blood on the streets. I'm old enough. I watched Black people getting hoses and dogs for even talking about going to vote. Okay. One party has tried to restrict your vote. So that Black woman who says I'm voting for Trump, that's a nice thing. Just remember, one party is trying to restrict people who look like you from voting, and the other party is trying to preserve your vote. The Republicans had a commission. The gentleman was from Kansas. His name began with K, I forget. They couldn't find anything. They have created the big lie that there is voter irregularities. They have then created a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. And their solution is to minimize the vote of Black and brown people and others who don't vote Republican. If your policies were strong enough, you would win it on the strength of your arguments, not these lies. Vance got up there the other day and said Trump saved Obamacare. Really? I can't believe my eyes. I couldn't believe my ears. Your candidates have consistently lied, admitted they lied, and yet there are people who are quote unquote undecided. Don't worry about the increasing numbers of Black people going to vote for Trump. That is a figment of your imagination. 10, maybe 15%. As a wise man and good friend Chris Simmons once said, what has Trump done in the last 4 years that has helped a significant number of Black people that they're going to vote for Trump? They're not.
Okay, Bill, let me ask you some things. Thank you for that. What part of the state do you live in?
I live in Charlotte.
Okay. So tell us about
one of the few blue and around the Red Sea.
Tell us about how you feel people in the state are experiencing the relief efforts. Things going well?
I think that the relief efforts can always be doing better, but that everyone is doing everything humanly possible. What these people need to understand is this is like an earthquake in terms of, I guess, the results. They are literally bringing in food via mule because you can't get there any other way. People are using mountain climbing equipment to get to their family and friends. This is not the government's not doing anything. And of course, the local elected officials, including Tom Tillis, I did not vote for him, says these lies about the FEMA response are hurting people. And who are they hurting? Predominantly people in red areas, but also just citizens. The stress is always a test of leadership.
Right.
One person
So Bill,
is saying, hey, we got FEMA. The other person is telling lies and trying to get people to hate each other. Oh, the immigrants are getting food. That's why you're not getting food. No one up there is getting food. We're trying to deliver food for everybody. I'm donating. Other people are donating supplies, all that kind of stuff. People are helping their neighbors on the ground. Do not believe MAGA world telling you these lies. Look at the Republican politicians. They're giving the same message I am.
Okay, Bill. So there are two issues you raised that we could adjudicate every episode.
Okay.
And some episodes we need to. One is, we talked about it this morning. What percentage of black vote will Trump get? Okay. Chris,
12, maybe 15%.
Well, that's a lot. If he gets 15, he's going to win.
Maybe. Doubtful.
Okay. So, but we don't know. So we can speculate about it, but we don't know. The other thing you raised, January 6th. And I've been thinking in my head the 5 or 6 reasons Republicans give when asked, how can you vote for Trump at January 6th? Some of it I know you will find unpersuasive, like, well, Hillary Clinton said the election was stolen. You probably find all 5 of them unpersuasive. I'm not sure it's going to be productive to have one person or even 2 give their explanations. But if you think that would be helpful to you, I'm going to let Trisha give it a try, and then I'm going to get Bruce Director give it a try. But only if you promise to listen and recognize that if you feel it'd be productive. If you say nothing they could say would be of interest to you, I won't use the time on that.
No, I will listen to them. Let me just preface this by saying, pretend those people had headscarves and were screaming Allah Akbar. And you tell me now why you think it's okay.
My hope is by the end of this cycle, whether Trump wins or Harris wins, that there's some national understanding of how Trump people could vote for Trump even after January 6th on the part of Harris supporters. Because every Trump voter I know knows what happened on January 6th. Some of them might differ on the facts, but they know what happened. So, Tricia, you first, then Bruce. What would you like to say in explaining how you could support Donald Trump after January 6th? Bill is true to his word, listening intently.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, of course, I don't know any Republican who thought January 6th was a positive day. I think that we can all agree here that people have the right to peacefully protest, emphasis on peaceful. As a Republican, I don't believe Donald Trump incited in any way violence. He did use the word peacefully repeatedly when he was making that speech. I mean, there was a trial, right, for his second impeachment that, I mean, so this is all really, that piece was litigated. I do have to contest the facts, though, on the ground about police officers being killed. There were no police officers who were actually killed that day. There was tragically suicides and heart attacks in the days after, but police officers were not killed. And ultimately, I think, to your point, I mean, the transition of power is imperative for our democracy, the peaceful transition of power. And that ultimately did happen. Joe Biden has been president for the last 4 years. And so I think that that's how I come out of this.
Okay, Tricia, thank you. Now, Bill, I'm going to let Bruce talk. Bruce is your neighbor to the north. He lives in Virginia, dangerously close to the Mason-Dixon line. But he's still a good Southern gentleman. Bruce, what is your explanation of how you could support Donald Trump even after January 6th?
Well, because I don't think January 6th is how Bill described it. It was a riot. It was, first of all, it was a peaceful rally that had a lot of people in it who had a lot of who were not part of the riot. Trump did not incite any violence, as Trish said. He asked for peaceful demonstrations. The Democrats, including with the January 6th committee, have tried to uh, characterize it falsely as a insurrection, which it wasn't. It wasn't an insurrection, it was a riot. It wasn't an attempt to overthrow the government. That's just hyperbolic. There was a peaceful transfer of power. Trump left the White House. He didn't try and stay there. He had a reason, whether you like it or not, to challenge some of the irregularities in the election. People keep talking about the 60 cases that were filed, but virtually all of them, if you go back and look at the record, which I have, were dismissed on standing grounds or procedural grounds. Very little of that evidence was really litigated, and I don't know if that evidence that was presented was sufficient to overturn the election. But it wasn't.
Bruce,
yeah.
Yep. Let me ask you one question, and then
Go ahead.
And then I'm gonna move on. Is there anything Donald Trump did on January 6th that bothers you about his judgment, his conduct, his values? Anything he did or didn't do that day?
Not about his values or judgment. I wish that he would have made the statement that he eventually made a little bit earlier. But I also don't know what he was faced with, what the back and forth was. And I just have one more thing, which is that it's clear now from the documents which have come out, that he did authorize 10,000 National Guard troops to be available, and that didn't happen. And had there been large numbers of National Guard troops supporting the police at the Capitol, that disturbance would never have turned into the riot that it was.
All right, Bruce, thank you. Bill, we'll keep talking about this, and I know I want you to respond briefly to what Tricia and Bruce said, but we're not going to settle it tonight. But we're going to stay on this, because this is one of the few places in America where we're trying to solve this. I want you to say what you think about what they said. Briefly, please.
Because a coup fails does not mean it was peaceful. Ms. McLaughlin, I would encourage you to look at the film. People get and that's not peaceful. And I'm sorry, but what about hang Mike Pence is peaceful? What about where's Nancy? Again, we need to speak truth, facts. You saw it on TV, I did. If you call that a peaceful transition of power, then our definition of violence is different. As for
okay, Bill, thank you. Please come. I'm sorry. Finish up. Sorry, I muted you accident. All right, Bill. Sorry. All right, Bill, come back regularly. I apologize. I muted you before I wanted to. All right. Some of you know, some of you don't know my two-way colleague, Teslin Figara, is a political analyst. She hosts on our platform Wednesday nights at 8. Tap in with Teslin Figara. Teslin, so glad to have you here. We've talked about a ton of stuff. I'd love to just yield the floor to you. And if you want to comment on the conversation we just had or anything that happened earlier, whatever you'd like to say.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Mark. Love your format. I'll just, one of the things, before I am a talking head, I am an organizer first. I was credited for the only African-American on the ground in Michigan when for Bernie Sanders. I was his National Racial Justice Director when we actually beat Hillary Clinton and upset in Michigan. As you know, we won by a margin, 2%. So I just wanted to kind of chime in on Tricia's point on having, and I am an independent, by the way. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. 90% of my policies do lean left. I want to put that out there. But I try to give, when I'm in these conversations, I try to give data and facts. It's not about my opinion or what I think, just really laying out where we are. And the reality of it is, Mark, none of us know how this election is going to happen. None of us, not any of us. This is something that has never happened before, watching a presidential campaign in 90 days, switch power from one candidate to the other. Donald Trump's numbers have not changed at all. The Trumpers, who are to me very different than conservatives, traditional conservatives, traditional Republicans. People are in it to win it with Donald Trump, period. His numbers have not changed. So this has been a question of who can the Democrat Party bring out from their side? Who can they galvanize to bring? Eleanor was right when she said about the Black voter you had on earlier. 90% of Black people vote for the Democrat Party. So when we talk about, 1 or 2% that can make a difference that vote for Republicans, it is true. I know plenty of Black conservatives. I host a show on Revolt Television where we do verses on each side. We do that about once a month. So there are Black voters that will go to the Trump side. It can absolutely make a difference when you talk about Georgia, where I organize, when you're talking about 15,000 people that can flip a state. It doesn't take much, to flip a state. So that's a real threat. But I just want to now say this quickly. I did want to give Tricia maybe some positive news for Republicans. Michigan is not in the bag. When you look at Michigan and you look at all of the demographics, it's not in the bag for Democrats, not at all. I probably did, Mark, about 10 podcasts on this saying the Democrats are in trouble. And I'll just give this information. And a lot of my colleagues on the left won't like it. But when you look at the constituents in Michigan, you have one, the Arab American community, the largest, as you know, the largest population for Arab Americans in the country. Rashida Tlaib, a Democrat, organized 100,000 people to go to the polls to say, I am not committed to this party. I'm not committed to Biden. And I am willing to not only just say, no, I'm not interested in voting, but actually put on my clothes, go down to the poll, organize money around it to say I'm not committed. When you look at that as a constituency, and they're not changing their minds. They are dead serious about a ceasefire. They are not interested in softer rhetoric. They're not interested in, what possibly could happen. They do understand that under the Trump administration that things will get worse, but they are pushing the Democrat Party to do what they can. That's one constituency that is not in the bag for Democrats. The second constituency that we were successful with the Bernie Sanders campaign, the college youth constituency, we were able to gather them to get a lot of the votes for Bernie Sanders. As you know, the youth vote is very unpredictable. Number one, you can't depend on them to show up. The motivation in the last 90 days may keep them close, but again, it's a 50-50 chance. But let's look at, are they upset about college debt not being relieved? Yes. Are they upset about the Gaza war? Yes. So you have penetration in that demographic. The third demographic, the unions. Look at what's happening with the unions. For the first time ever, Teamsters did not endorse a presidential candidate, which has, as you know, in the last 30 years have always went Democrat. Now, true enough, a lot of the union individual branches have endorsed Harris. But when you look at the fact that the Teamsters overall went to the RNC for the very first time, and now you have unions who are still pissed off, who are still literally still organizing ways to strike, that is a very important constituency in Michigan. And then you have the Black vote, which Detroit will more than likely hold for Harris. But when you look at the 8 early voting areas that are traditionally low, they have not been spending the money on the ground. Just last week, Derek Johnson with the NAACP called out the Harris campaign and said that money is not being spent on the ground. So when you see all of those constituencies, not Gretchen or anybody else can make a miracle in Michigan, because too many of those demographics have just been penetrated. And so I'm interested to see how Michigan will fall. Likely left, but certainly not in the bag.
Yeah. All right, Teslin, thank you. Stay with us. I want to bring Michelle in and just say about what you just said, and going back to what Trish said earlier. In my experience, Republicans look at Gretchen Whitmer as some like magician who can carry the state no matter what. And I find Democrats and people on the left are a little bit more jaundiced about that and not as sure. Michelle, welcome in. Tell everybody who doesn't know where you're from, who you're supporting, and what's on your mind.
I'm from Pennsylvania. I support Harris. I was listening intently to what Tricia and others were saying about January 6th. I still go back, like my good friend Chris Simmons, to what did the president do for those 3 hours? And until someone can explain how that makes sense and how he wasn't complicit, I could never vote for him. The other point that I wanted to make is about the details on various plans, Harris versus Trump. And what I keep thinking about is when we talk about healthcare, all we know is that Trump was in office for 4 years. And then 4 years after that, he talked about healthcare. He still doesn't have a plan. He has a concept of a plan. When he was in office, he talked about infrastructure. every week was going to be infrastructure week. We never had any legislation on infrastructure. And Biden Harris did get an infrastructure plan. So this talk about, well, we knew what Trump did because he was in office. You're absolutely right. We know what he did and we know what he didn't do. And that's what I'm
Michelle.
hearing.
Okay. Michelle, thank you. Would you like to ask a question, or can I ask my colleagues if they'd like to ask you a question?
I'd rather they ask me.
All right. Anybody want to ask a Pennsylvania voter a question? Teslin or Eleanor or Tricia? Up to you guys. If not, bring in our next person.
Do you have a sense of which way the state might be leaning? And is the governor, do you think it was a mistake that Harris did not put the governor on the ticket? Would that have sealed the state for the Democrats?
I don't know about that. I'm a huge Josh supporter. I'm also Jewish. I was very concerned with what's going on in the Mideast, that adding Josh to the ticket might increase the anti-Semitism, all the conflict on college campuses. So, not to mention the fact that I didn't think that he would really want to be a vice president as opposed to a president.
Yeah. And Michelle, quickly, how do you feel the state's going? Is it toss up, or do you feel one candidate's favored at this point?
I was actually out phone banking today, and I've been door knocking. We've had buses coming down from New York with people knocking on doors in Pennsylvania. I heard through a friend of mine that Trump had an office in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure exactly where, but it since has closed. So that gives me hope. I'm seeing a lot of Trump signs, but I'm not seeing the Trump flags and banners like I did in 20. So
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. Come back regularly.
Thank you.
Joe, you're up. Tell folks where you don't know where you are, who you're supporting, what's on your mind.
All right, am I on?
Yes, sir.
I am in Southwest Louisiana. I'm supporting Harris. I've actually never voted before, I'm embarrassed to say. This particular cycle is the first one that I've really been following. My questions are, what I don't hear people really talking about that scares me the most is that Vance is more likely to become president than Waltz is to become president. And Vance really scares me because I think Trump is ingenious. I think Vance is very, very smart and shrewd and opportunistic. And I think he's got the chops. And honestly, the vice presidential debate, I thought he did well, but it scared me because he just seems like, I don't know, he just seems very manipulative to me. And so I don't hear people talking enough about fear that Vance is much more likely to become president over the next 4 years if Trump would win than Waltz becoming president.
Yeah. Joe, let me ask you a couple questions. First of all, how'd you find two-way?
Smerconish.
And were you going to vote for Joe Biden, or you only decided to vote because of Vice President Harris?
Oh, no, I was going to vote for Joe Biden.
And in general, what do you like most about each candidate? What's the thing you like most about each one?
I mean, part of what I've learned through this platform, because before I started coming on, I really just couldn't understand how anybody would support Trump. I mean, I'm in an area where I can't put a Trump sign in my yard or a bumper sticker. I mean, sorry,
A Harris sign. Yeah.
on my car.
What do you like most about Donald Trump?
I think that what I've learned from this platform is that it seems like he really is trying to lift up people that feel that they've been left behind.
Yeah. And what do you like most about Vice President Harris? And then I'm going to have everybody here answer your question about
Yeah,
about JD
I think
Vance.
she does. I think she does the same thing, but she does it with an empathy, whereas I don't know, Trump is just so angry and mean, in my opinion. And I mean, I think they're both trying to do the same thing, but in two completely different ways.
Okay, Joe, thank you. Trisha, and then Tesla, and then Eleanor. Anyone who wants to weigh in that order.
Yeah.
Can you either stoke or allay Joe's fears about the pure evil of JD Vance?
Well, I had a quick question for Joe, and then I can maybe answer or give you my opinion. What is it more is there a certain policy that you're most attracted to for the Harris Waltz ticket, or is it more personality that you're very turned off by the Vance Trump personality?
Um, I mean, I just think that Harris seems to be ethical and moral, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know all the history of all these candidates. Like, I can't speak to everybody's record since they became politicians, but I I really think that Harris is going to be the one, or I trust more to really help people that aren't blessed, because I was born in a upper middle class background, went to private schools. Like, I know that I hit the genetic lottery, and I really think that she would be the one, definitely more so than Trump, that would help people that didn't hit the genetic lottery. That's
Okay, thank you for that. So, Trisha, do you think he's right to be afraid of JD Vance, or you probably know JD a little bit?
And
Yeah,
I
a
want
little
to
bit.
one thing real quick that I forgot to say is, like, I know that everybody on the right says or what you say, we failed dangerously liberal. Like, when I think of Vance, I think of dangerously conservative.
Got it. Okay.
Got it. Okay, Trisha.
Well, so I'm from the same hometown as JD Vance. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. So there's been some overlap, but I would be curious at some point, Joe, to revisit with you if you're as familiar with JD Vance's background. Kind of, you're speaking to that kind of empathy. How are you going to make my life better when I come from a certain background, or where so many Americans are struggling? And I think that JD Vance, uniquely to really any candidate, whether it be Waltz, Harris, or Trump, can actually speak to that, because he's really come from, a very tough background, a mother who dealt with addiction, a very impoverished community, and he went on to really, really succeed. Went to Ohio State, went on to serve in the Marines, and then of course became a successful businessman, and ultimately a U.S. senator, and now the vice presidential nominee for the Republican ticket. So I think that his background, he does have a more populist perspective. I think maybe potentially even more so than Donald Trump does. One could argue that, but I would be curious if your takeaway might be different if you, and maybe you already do know his background, but I think it's compelling, and I think it's something that gets a little bit whitewashed in the media. It's like painting this kind of evil genius in some sense, and I think he's not that at all. I think he's a very bright guy, but I think he has a lot of empathy for people of his background.
Teslin, do you have a point of view? Teslin, do you have a point? Hold on, Joe. I want to get everybody in first. Do you have a point of view about JD Vance, Teslin?
Yeah, my point of view is that let's just be honest about it. He's fumbled the ball from the very moment that he's been on the campaign. He's made mistake after mistake, offending women, offending America. Coach Waltz, I like to call him Coach Waltz, is actually very relatable as well. Serving as a teacher, being a coach, also in the military. I'm a veteran, by the way, as well. But what I will give JD Vance credit for is he was allowed to reinvent himself on the debate stage. I think Waltz missed an opportunity to be able to actually show the difference between him and Waltz. They were having a very kumbaya moment, much like what you guys are having here, a very kumbaya moment, and they missed the opportunity. He missed the opportunity to show what JD Vance has been saying the last 20 or 30, the last 90 days that he's been on the campaign trail. I look at things, Mark, on who is going to get to victory. How is this all going to land? And so when the VP debate, Again, great debate. They show where they all agree, but did not show the differences. And people just bottom line want to know where we disagree so that we can actually work through that and come up with a solution, or just agree to disagree. And so I think Walz missed that. And I think actually the Pennsylvania governor, I think Superior would have done a better job, to be quite honest with you. At the debate, I think he would have washed the floor with Vance.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, I think it was a mistake.
Eleanor, would you like to have dinner with J.D. Vance?
Not particularly. Um,
He's buying. He's a rich guy.
I'm sure that's all
Yeah.
true, and he's now very methodical about trying to present a nicer side of his character. In case Trump loses, he wants to preserve his future, but he embodies the intellect and the political smarts to advance the authoritarian agenda that Trump stands for. And it's Vance who wrote the introduction to the book that's coming out after the election about Project 2025. And his views about women and families are frankly pretty offensive to a lot of people. And he's like from another century, kind of maybe overreacting to the background that he had. I understand his background. I can see where some of his attitudes come from, but women do not, speaking broadly, on the abortion issue, he's a lot harder edge than Trump is. So, and Joe is exactly right. He has a bigger chance to become president. Trump is a lame duck from the minute he walks in the Oval Office, should he win, because he can't have 2 consecutive terms. So Vance, having spent less than 2 years in government, would be poised to be a president. So I think his views, his thoughts about foreign policy and everything really should be more examined. And if this was a normal year, maybe it would happen, but it's not. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think we're voting for somebody. We're complaining most of this hour about not getting enough knowledge about Kamala Harris, and actually, when you look at what we know and don't know about Vance, there's a huge vacant area there, which is not getting any attention.
All right. Thank you, Eleanor. Joe, so glad to have you as a voter and as a member of the two-way community, and we hope you'll come back regularly. All right. We're going to close, even though we're a little bit over. I got an email today from somebody who said, Mark, you're too reliant on Chris Simmons. That's what they said. That you're too reliant on Chris Simmons. Chris Simmons, for those of you who are new, lives in Atlanta, Georgia. He's a staunch Harris supporter. We have him on regularly because I am too reliant on him. That's what I said. I said, I am too reliant on Chris Simmons. So, Chris, I don't know what you wanted to say, but I'd love just a benediction. Play us off the air with some wise words.
Well, I will say this. I decided that there's too few Harris people on here, which is why I invited my good friend and best friend from Harvard, Bill Arlene, to spread some wisdom today.
He really was your friend. I thought he just was speaking metaphorically.
Oh no, we're
Okay.
buddies from age 18.
All right. Okay.
And I've invited about 20 more people on here, so maybe things will get a bit more balanced as we go forward. I had a question for Eleanor, if I can ask it.
Sure. It's okay with
Because
Eleanor. It's okay with us.
Every time I bring up race as an issue in people's election decisions, I get accused of being a Black man stuck in the past. So I want to get a white woman's opinion on what role race and gender you think are playing in at the margin decisions that could flip an election, since, as the very smart Black woman who spoke said, some of these races are going to get decided by 10, 12,000 votes or less.
Right. Well, what's so remarkable about this election is that the Democratic candidates' race and gender has not been top of the mind from the day that she received the nomination. I think the expectation when Biden was rumored to be maybe stepping aside, there was this fear among Democrats that she was not popular. Her poll ratings were lower than Biden's. And, the Republicans were gleeful, thinking, oh, if they don't have Biden, this would be great. And her debut was smooth, welcoming, extraordinary joy, momentum, the whole thing. And it's so different from 2016, where Hillary's gender was like the first thing that everybody said about her. And at the convention, she wore white, suffrage white. And this time we're pretending, maybe pretending that it doesn't matter. I think it probably does, and we'll find out on
Yeah,
election day.
Eleanor,
But
Kamala's smart enough not to talk about it much,
yeah.
just like Obama was smart enough not to talk about it much. But it certainly doesn't mean it's not in some people's minds when
Right.
they do what they do.
Well,
Excellent.
when Obama was running, I worked for Newsweek, and we used to cover the candidates off the record, and then we would publish a special issue after Election Day of all the secrets we found out. Now, that's impossible in today's climate. But in 2008, when Obama was running, my editors kept saying to me, they must surely be worried about the fact that he's Black. And I would talk to David Axelrod and the others, and they would say, it's an advantage in this election. And when he won Iowa, they made a believer out of me. Now, there was a problem when the Reverend made some comments, right? And Obama stepped up and delivered a wonderful, game-changing speech on race, speaking from his white half and his Black half, if you will. And so, maybe we'll get an illuminating moment on election day or after. But you raise a very important subject, which you're right, most people are not openly discussing it. Instead, immigrants are the scapegoats of this election season.
Teslin, did you want to say something about this?
Yeah, we're discussing it big time. I mean, one of the first fundraisers was Win with Black Women, with 100,000 Black women that were, raising money for Kamala Harris. And the second day, the fundraiser was Win with Black Men. So it's actually being discussed very heavily. But the issue on what it's really going to come down to, just to answer your question based on data alone, this comes down to white women. That's just the bottom line. White women voted for Trump. Obama. They flipped and voted for Obama. Then when Trump had an opportunity to vote for Trump, they went back with their husbands and voted for Trump. And then when the midterms happened under the Biden administration, due to the Roe versus Wade, they voted again for the Democrat side. This is absolutely up to, because 90%, as I mentioned before, 90% of Black people vote Democratic. We already know that. I'm talking about those who vote, not those who do not vote. But it will come down to white women and Roe versus Wade. So yes, race and gender matters, but it won't be about Black women. It'll be about white women. And this is why anytime you see an abortion rally, anytime you see the pussycat movement, you see white women. You see no Black women at all. And that's one of the misconceptions that you hear on social media in Black spaces, that Black people are pushing this abortion conversation. Actually, we're not. Actually, we have our children more likely than white women, but we've had more abortions disproportionately. So race and gender matters, but the gender falls on Roe versus Wade. And how many white women will be willing to give a woman of color a position that they were not willing to give to Hillary Clinton?
Well, white women, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden lost white women.
Right. They failed her. That's right.
Yeah.
That's why I'm concerned.
Right. So we'll see. The abortion issue may be enough to change that this time.
That's literally all Democrats have. And the reality is, I don't know if it is enough to get out. He's in Atlanta. I'm in Atlanta. West side of Atlanta has no Harris signs, no money on the ground. So when you talk about how do you get out enough voters, 200,000 voters have been purged from the rolls in Georgia. This is about who's going to get out. Not necessarily what we think should be right or what we feel or what we project. This just really comes down to the numbers. And so until I see a white women from North Carolina do a fundraising for Harris, Democrats should be concerned. The popular vote, that's great. This media blitz that they're doing, that's great. But it's a losing strategy, honestly, Mark. Sitting on podcasts is a popular vote thing. It is not an electoral college thing. And I think conservatives do a better job on the ground in that way.
Chris Simmons, you are a man of the future, not a man of the past. And that's why I'm so reliant on you. Thank you for joining. We'll see you soon. Okay. Tricia, thank you for joining. And Eleanor, thank you. Joe, you did not seem nervous at all. You were excellent. And we're glad you stepped up and we're glad you're voting. Teslin, you guys spend more time with Teslin tomorrow night, 8 o'clock Eastern time, right here on the two-way platform. So don't miss that. And I'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern time with Sean and Dan for the morning meeting. And we'll look at, amongst other things, the vice president's appearance. Probably not a base strategy, as Teslin pointed out, on Colbert tonight, but we'll take a look at that. Thank you, everybody, for participating again. Tricia, Teslin, Eleanor in particular. We'll see everybody 9 a.m. Eastern time. Have a good night.
Thank you.